Okay, we're going to start the evening. I want to welcome you to the Norwood Park Historical Society. I'm Stan Banish. I'm a director on the board of directors, and I'm going to introduce the speaker and make a few announcements. So again, I welcome you to the first program of our fall season, and there are a few dates and events that I would like to mention to you so you can mark in your calendars. You remember that gentleman, Pat Piper? Anybody that old remembers Pat Piper? Cubs announcer, field announcer, right? Yeah. Okay. He used to say before the Cubs games, "Ladies and gentlemen, have your pencils and scorecards ready for today's lineup." And then he would proceed to name the various players. Well, we too have a lineup coming up for the fall season. We have Stems and Steins this Saturday, which is a beer and wine tasting right here at Chicago's, on the grounds of Chicago's oldest house, from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. And tickets are still available for that. And it's an affair where there's music and food and libation and no dancing, though. If you dance, you'll have to do it on the grass. Then October 4th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., we will have the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile here. And that will be from as part of our Halloween Fest and Autumnal Market. So the Wienermobile will be out towards the curvature in the front driveway. And in the back barn will be various fundraising items for sale. There'll be hot dogs, neighborhood honey, autumn breads, fall cookies, kid face painting, raffle baskets, jam and preserves, peanut brittle and toffee, candy, nuts, bundt cakes, apple cider, popcorn, and cotton candy. So, okay. Then on, let's see. We're going to have Super Dog fundraising program or food raising program. And that will last from October 29th through October 20th. Let me get my glasses back on. October 20th through October 26th. And that's at either Super Dog, the one in Wheeling or the one here at Nagel in Milwaukee. And then there's coupons in the back here if you'll need a coupon to take advantage of it and help the Historical Society raise some funds. And then we have a Victoria's Craft Show in Holidays Cafe, and that's coming up Thursday, November 13, and November 14 from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., and November 15 from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. That's going to be right here, right in this room, and the next room, and also in the food next to the kitchen area. And then some of our other programs are coming up. Let's see what else they got here. Oh, the alderman will be coming next month in October. So those of you who have issues, concerns, want to understand better what's happening in the ward, this is your time. He's going to come right here. He'll speak. He'll answer your questions and so forth. So you can either mark your calendars for any of these events, or you can grab a flyer that's in the back as you exit the property. Okay, so now we can get to the reason you're here, to hear about the Chicago fire. So theories abound as to the person or persons responsible for the great conflagration that flattened the city of Chicago the night of October 8, 1871, and continuing for the next 2 days. There are many blames put on a number of people, but Our speaker tonight will be talking about another compelling theory, one that rang true 30 years after the fire to the people of that generation who lived through the horrific disaster. However, the speaker uncovered an amazing tale during book research and offers it in this compelling presentation on who really started the Great Chicago Fire. And our speaker is Richard Lindberg, who has written over 20 books, primarily on Chicago history, and the people who contributed to its greatness or lack thereof. And he's an award-winning author. And in this PowerPoint presentation, he's going to discuss this further about the Chicago Fire. In addition, as part of the joint program, he's invited South suburban novelist George Takei to briefly discuss his first novel, The Great Chicago Fire Conspiracy. The book was nominated for Pulp Factory's Best Pulp Novel in 2021. So between the two of them, you're going to get a real in-depth understanding of the Chicago Fire, the people who participated, and you'll learn a little bit more details about the history of Chicago. So I welcome Richard Lindberg here and give him a big hand, please. Thank you.
I don't need this?
No.
I don't need this or this?
You don't need a handout.
Okay, thank you. Art, do we have a slide advance here?
Yes, you use the right arrow on the laptop.
Oh, right arrow on the laptop. Okay, got it. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out. And as Stan mentioned, following my talk, I'm going to ask George Takei. George, stand up. Let everybody see you. There he is. Came all the way from Oak Lawn to be with us today. And he writes in the pulp fiction genre, and he's got a great tale to weave, and he will tell you about that. And did you bring any books, George?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. All right. Well, again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And tonight I will present to you what I believe to be the most plausible solution to one of the most vexing mysteries in Chicago history. The story of the Great Chicago Fire, a dreadful tragedy that destroyed nearly 4 miles of city landscape and rendered 90,000 people homeless on October 8th through the 10th, has been told and retold in countless numbers of published books, articles, and pamphlets from 1871 through our modern day. The question most asked is, who is the culprit responsible for starting this fire? There have been several interesting suspects and numerous theories advanced, but the conventional wisdom points an accusatory finger at a skittish cow owned by Mrs. Catherine O'Leary, a poor Irish immigrant residing at 137 DeKoven Street in the impoverished Conley's Patch neighborhood on Chicago's near west side. All right, now let me figure out, is it the arrow key on the bottom?
Right arrow, the left arrow. Or try right arrow.
There we go, and there's Mrs. O'Leary. Mrs. O'Leary went to her grave suffering the stigma and social ostracization inflicted upon her by the press, her neighbors, and generations of Chicago residents to come. As in many other tales of important historical events that tend to take on a life of their own, the real truth inevitably falls within the boundaries of rumor, accusation, exaggerated myths, and legend. And so it would be for Kate O'Leary, but before we delve much deeper into the tragic circumstances of her life, let's first review the essential facts of the Chicago Fire. By 1870, Chicago's population had swelled to 298,000. It was the dawn of a remarkable period of prolonged city growth fueled by massive European immigration. By 1890, just 19 years after the Great Fire, over 1 million people resided within its limits. Many of these impoverished immigrants had settled into densely packed, substandard ghetto neighborhoods. William Bross, a teacher from Pennsylvania who made his way to Chicago in 1848, made note of Chicago's grimy appearance, calling it a, quote, slab city. Though he would go on to become a major promoter of the city and co-owner of the Chicago Tribune, Bross wasn't impressed with what he saw when he first arrived. Pigs and vermin freely roamed the muddy, garbage-strewn streets, which lacked paved sidewalks and property drainage systems. Bross witnessed how green and black slime would gush up between the cracks of the wooden sidewalks. He also lamented the state of the water supply, often finding minnows, quote, sporting in one's wash bowl or dead and stuck in the faucets, end quote. Imagine that, folks. Bill Brecker, the carpenter, would never stand for that, right, Bill? He would fix that. Conley's Patch was an Irish enclave, a poor working-class community sustained by its defining ethnic culture, family-run businesses, and thousands of wooden shacks with dangerous, flammable tar paper roofs in dwellings residents called home. Geese and wild dogs wandered down the uneven dirt streets where the chickens scratched. Children swarmed in the alleys, throwing pebbles at one another and making mischief in chaotic play. Crime was endemic, and prevailing anti-immigrant prejudices of the mostly Anglo-nativist downtown city officials made upward mobility difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. Serious fires were frequent, but none would compare to the one that ignited on October 8, 1871. That year, Chicago's summer and fall months were unusually dry, with only 1/4 the normal amount of rain falling between July and October. Many of the city's wooden buildings and sidewalks had dried out in the summer's intense heat. The Chicago Fire Department, with only 185 men and 17 horse-drawn steam pumpers, were simply overwhelmed by a series of fires erupting across the city during those months. A major fire, the night before the big one, on the 8th, wiped out 4 city blocks south of downtown and had exhausted the overlooked firefighters and damaged their equipment. A prophecy of the coming mega disaster, framed in a public speech delivered by the famous lecturer George Francis Train on October 7th at Falwell Hall the night before, foretold of a, quote, terrible calamity impending over the city of Chicago. And he said, "This is the last public address that will be delivered," he warned. When asked later if he was a seer or a prophet, he modestly replied that he had no connection to the spirit world or a gift of prophecy. His warning, he said, referred to the crime, vice, and loose morality of wicked old Chicago that would surely become the city's downfall, not the fire. And there you see George Francis Train. Just southwest of the Central Business District on DeKoven, Catherine O'Leary was getting ready for bed. This is the only known photo of the family home, purchased by her husband Patrick in 1864. Mrs. O'Leary was an immigrant from County Kerry, and the couple ran a successful dairy operation from her modest cottage and backyard barn, selling milk and milk products to the neighbors. She owned 6 cows, a horse, and a wagon. Her husband Patrick was a Civil War veteran, mustered into the Union Army in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in 1864. They had 5 children, 2 of whom attended Catholic school at Holy Family, a nearby parish. Catherine went to bed sometime around 8 o'clock. The O'Leary's tenants and neighbors, the McLaughlins, were having a party next door to celebrate a relative's visit from Ireland. After drifting off to sleep, Catherine's husband woke her to alert that a fire had started in their barn. More about that shortly. These side-by-side photos show a Chicago firehouse company in 1872 and a drawing of the hose cart nicknamed the Little Giant racing through the fire district. The city had established watchmen and fire alarm systems that would, in theory, alert the fire department. But these protections, when combined with human error, were not foolproof. From atop the courthouse, several miles to the north, watchman Matthias Schaefer spotted the fire on DeKoven, but he incorrectly identified the location. When Schaefer tried to correct the problem, the operator at the fire alarm telegraph department would not allow him to fix it, telling him that the firefighters would pass right by the real location. It didn't seem to matter to him. A nearby shopkeeper who was in charge of an alarm system also sent out an alert, but that didn't work. The department went to the wrong location. Worse, the hoses burst and the water supply was low, given the fire from the night before. Published accounts and memoirs from eyewitnesses accused a number of firefighters of drunkenness the night of the fire, following a Sunday of relaxation and unwinding. Defending the valiant work of his men that night, Chief Robert Williams declared, misdirected fire equipment had arrived too late, and a steady wind from the southwest carried the flame and blazing debris from block to block. The slums began kindling for the downtown fire, where even the supposedly fireproof stone and brick buildings exploded in flames as the destruction relentlessly swept northward. By midnight, a few hours after the blaze began in Mrs. O'Leary's barn, the fire had reached the present-day loop. The flames could be seen from 40 miles away. Some witnesses described what they called fire devils. Mayor Roswell Mason, shown here in this image, ordered the saloons closed, and as the crisis reached the outskirts of downtown, he released all of the prisoners detained in the city bridewell. Mason's hastily scrawled handwritten note is shown in this image. Meanwhile, inside the vacated taverns, gangs of ruffians broke in through the doors to guzzle as much free liquor as they could swallow before the fire reached the buildings. It's a drinking town, remember that. This is a map of the burnt district, stemming from just north of Roosevelt Road, north to North Avenue. On the first night of the fire, strong southwesterly winds fanned the flames high into the sky and created convection spirals, or what they call the fire devils, self-generating whirls of flame and heated air. Let's see here, hold on. This is a map showing some of the length and breadth of the fire, and with some other interesting statistics, which I'm not going to go into. But the chart illustrates the extent of the rack and ruin. 17,540 buildings completely destroyed, an estimated 300 lives lost, and 90,000 to 100,000 left homeless. Let me put this out of the way, thank you. While the fire had devastated the downtown, parts of the west side, and much of the north side of Chicago, the stockyards and lumber yards on the south and west sides remained mostly intact. Most of the wharfs, lumber yards, and mills along the Chicago River survived, as did 2/3 of the grain elevators to the west. The industries surrounding agriculture and trade kept the city finances as stable as possible in the aftermath, and they would employ thousands of people in the post-fire period. Journalist Herman Kogan, the father of our radio host and Tribune columnist Rick Kogan, aptly described the fire devils in his book about the fire. As the fire devils spit burning debris in all directions, causing more buildings to burn, Kogan supplied a vivid account of the conditions. All of the great downtown hotels and theaters leveled, and the bell atop the county building crashing to the ground. Here's an image of Chicago as it looked when the last of the flames were extinguished. In the panic of that night, people fled northward, pushing and shoving to get across the river and the narrow bridges spanning the expanse of the river, refusing to believe the fire would jump northward, but it did. Along Oak Street Beach, families waded into Lake Michigan and huddled in water up to their noses in order to escape the fearsome heat and the cinders raining down upon them. Several people reportedly jumped into open graves in Lincoln Park. It was then a public cemetery. To escape. Mercifully, the rain began to fall on Monday, October 9th, and the rainfall, combined with the lake and stretches of unbuilt lots on the north side, finally halted the relentless path of destruction by the morning of the 10th. Here are some photos of that destruction. There are no known photographic images in existence of the actual fire in progress as it devoured the city. Chicago Tribune publisher Joseph Medill published a statement of encouragement to all Chicagoans once the newspaper presses resumed service. "Cheer up, Chicago shall rise again," he proclaimed, and the people were encouraged. There, Lake Street from Michigan Avenue, before and after the fire, how they looked. Here's a stereopticon image of downtown Chicago and its devastation. The water tower was the only, well, it's kind of a fallacy to say Chicago water tower was the only building that stood. That's simply not true. Malin Ogden's house on the north side stood, plus all those warehouses and commercial granaries and so on to the west of the city, they all stood. It's kind of become a popular myth that the Chicago water tower is the only one to survive. And Malin Ogden's mansion is shown in that colored painting on the top. But the north side was sparsely populated in those days. It was the last geographic section of Chicago to be formally, to become a real thriving area. That's Rush Medical College, opened at Grand and Dearborn in 1837. But the larger question is, what really happened at 137 DeKoven Street that night? And do we finally have a reasonable solution to the mystery? To sum up what we already know, the O'Learys retired at 8 o'clock to get some sleep in the muggy October heat. Their labors would begin early next morning. Within 24 hours, reporters from the Chicago Journal and the Chicago Times traced the origin of the fire to DeKoven, where they discovered, in a strange twist of fate, that the O'Leary cottage was the only building in the district to still stand. The newspapers vilified Mrs. O'Leary as an unpleasant old hag and marked her with cruel illustrations, such as this one, while whipping up anti-Irish, anti-immigrant fervor within the city. Reportedly, a lynch mob organized with the intent of tracking down Patrick O'Leary and hanging him from a lamp pole had took form. The O'Learys sold their cottage in 1874 to a man named Kolar for $500 and moved to South Halsted and 47th, near the stockyards, then a remote section of Chicago. Incidentally, Mrs. O'Leary, born in County Kerry in 1827, was married to Patrick in 1845. She was not a weather-beaten old hag, as the newspapers inferred. She was only 44 years old. Pardon me? 35, I'm sorry. Author Mae Waskin submitted a bizarre theory about the origin of the fire that gained traction many decades later in his book, Mrs. O'Leary's Comet. He blamed it on a meteorological event. Biela's comet, allegedly crashing to the earth that night, destroyed not only Chicago, but Peshtigo, Wisconsin, and Holland, and in Manistee, Michigan, that same night. It's a far-fetched notion that has been discounted by scientists. Louis Cohn, a wealthy Chicago importer and charity benefactor, asserted in 1942 that it was he who started the fire while playing a game of craps in the O'Leary barn with Jim O'Leary, Kate's youngest son. The problem with this theory is that Jim was only 9 years old at the time. Yeah. Cohn was dismissed as a harmless crank, but the Medill School of Journalism happily accepted his $35,000 endowment following his death. In his book, Mrs. O'Leary and the Myth of Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, my good friend and author, Dick Bales, conducted a deep dive investigation into the fire origin and came up with a compelling theory, one that was endorsed by Alderman Ed Burke and the City Council, who formally absolved Mrs. O'Leary of any fault for starting the fire. Dick attached blame to a hobo and a neighborhood no-account named Dennis Pegleg Sullivan, who had accidentally ignited the blaze while attempting to steal milk from the barn and then fled. There's Dick on the left and Alderman Burke on the right, and the unfortunate Pegleg Sullivan on the far right. Dick's book has earned deserved high praise for its originality and content, and I must admit it is the best book on the Chicago fire that I've ever read. It is lavishly illustrated and arguably the most complete account to be published to date. However, my own research reveals a slightly different version to this history, essentially involving the same cast of characters. In 1901, Mary Callahan, a young woman in attendance at a welcoming party held next door at the McLaughlins on the night of the fire, revealed that she and Dennis Connors, the man whose arrival from Ireland was being celebrated, along with a few of their friends, had run out of milk required to make an alcoholic beverage called milk punch. The young people did not wish to disturb the sleeping O'Learys. Connors, a cousin of Patrick McLaughlin, boldly declared that he would venture into the barn and attempt to milk the cow. However, he did not know the first thing about milking a cow. Oh yeah, what's there to it? You just squeeze a couple tubes and you're all set, right? But the nervous cow had other ideas, and in all probability, kicked over the oil lantern, setting the barn ablaze. In a curious aside to the cow story, following the fire, a man allegedly purchased the teeth of the charred animal and sold them as Lucky Charms. But I digress. As the flames exploded inside the barn, and in terror, Alice Riley, Johnny Finnan, Mary Callahan, and Dennis Connors raced back to the party, afraid to confess to what had just happened. They quickly swore to each other lifetime silence. Pegleg Sullivan, meanwhile, was lounging on the sidewalk across the street. He spotted the flames bursting forth from the car barn. He frantically pounded on the O'Leary's front door to rouse them from their sleep, thus possibly saving their lives. So poor old Pegleg, vilified by my friend Dick and historical revisionists, emerges as a hero and not the scapegoat Dick portrayed him as. Catherine O'Leary Ledwell, one of Kate's daughters, affirmed that this version of events was true in a sworn statement in 1908 and again in 1933, as the newspaper clip shown here attests. Somehow, some way, though, Mary Callahan's story became lost and forgotten by the passage of time. I rediscovered it while conducting newspaper research for my last book, Tales of Forgotten Chicago, which was published in 2020. It became a chapter of that book. I believe it to be true, based on the statements of the people directly responsible for starting the fire. There was no reason for them to invent a tall tale, and their decades of silence was born out of a fear of severe reprisal, which is very understandable. In old age, they finally came forth with nothing left to lose or gain. No books were ever written about them, so there was no incentive to cash in that way. I believe this version of events will withstand the test of time. Fate was not kind to the O'Leary family. Patrick O'Leary and Kate led reclusive lives in the Stockyards district, although a board of inquiry officially absolved Catherine of any blame for starting the fire. In the following years, Catherine turned down interviews with reporters and steadfastly refused to be photographed. She passed away from acute pneumonia on July 3, 1895, at the family home. Her earthly toils mercifully ended. She was preceded in death by husband Patrick, who died in 1894, and was buried in an unmarked grave at Mount Olivet Cemetery. Their son, Big Jim, who once said that the fire started through spontaneous combustion, that was his theory, that it was hot in the barn and suddenly the hay blew up. That's how he explained it. He went on to become a powerful gambling boss of the early 20th century, a criminal as he was considered by the Chicago Police Department. He was the gambler boss of the yards, to use an Irish-American phrase. He built a memorial to his parents and with his accumulated riches years later. There you see the O'Leary Memorial. And there's Big Jim and his saloon. The O'Leary offspring suffered equally. Big Jim operated outside the law for much of his adult life by running illegal gambling operations in his Halstead Street saloon, standing opposite the Stockyards. He built himself a lavish mansion on Garfield Boulevard that still stands today. But his son, Jim Jr., broke the old man's heart by eloping with the daughter of Captain Clancy, the Chicago police captain who ruled the Stockyards. He had closed down Jim's gambling den many times and had harassed O'Leary for many years. What a shame it was for Big Jim to see his precious daughter marry the daughter of a Chicago police captain. Kate's daughter, Mary, and this was even more horrible, was accidentally shot by her brother Cornelius Con O'Leary in 1885 after the drunken Con fired a shot at Mary's sweetheart but missed him, instead striking his sister down with an errant pistol shot. Con, a roughhousing brawler, was apprehended and sentenced to life in prison. The city lay in ruins, a blackened landscape of ash cinders and twisted steel, and order had to be restored. To maintain peace and prevent wholesale looting, General Philip Sheridan was dispatched to the stricken city to impose temporary martial law. There were few reported incidents of civil disorder, and the next few weeks passed quietly. But I should also point out that within 2 days of the last of the fire being extinguished, temporary whorehouses were built on the shore of Lake Michigan. You know, business must go on, and a row of shacks right on the waterline of Lake Michigan were open for business. Mayor Mason issued a proclamation vowing to establish and maintain law and order. The promise of necessary supplies to feed and comfort the populace, and that City Hall business would be temporarily conducted at the Congregational Church on Washington Street. Chicago Relief and Aid Society was a philanthropic charitable organization Formed in Chicago in 1851, the society raised over $5 million from sources from around the world to provide food, clothing, water, and fuel. Additionally, 5,000 sewing machines were provided to women so they could make clothes for their families. Medical care was also a high priority, and most notably, over 60,000 people were vaccinated against smallpox. In later years, the society came under intense criticism for its efforts to help the poor. It was the contention of the society that poverty was a moral issue rather than an economic or social problem. Their post-fire housing strategies contributed to enduring patterns of ethnic and racial segregation over the next century. Building contractors erected temporary wooden structures for the purpose of resuming commerce and private business. The I will spirit of the city was on full display during the frantic weeks and years to follow. William D. Kerfoot opened a real estate agency inside this wooden shack. All gone but wife, children, and energy, he proclaimed. Deacon Bross confidently proclaimed that by 1900, Chicago was destined to become a city of 1 million souls. That bold and stunning prediction was achieved in 1890. Chicago rebuilt quickly. After the fire, laws were passed requiring new buildings to be constructed with fireproof materials such as brick, stone, marble, and limestone. These building materials, much more expensive than wood, were held together by mortar, a sticky, strong substance that ensured durability and fire resistance. In a year's time, Chicago newspapers glowingly reported the restoration of the Central Business District as its city transformed itself. In pre-fire days, Lake Street was the main hub of the retail stores. After the fire, Marshall Field, Levi Leader, and others succeeded in converting State Street into the famous shopping district it was destined to become. This is a peerless metropolis, proclaimed the Lakeside Monthly as brick and steel structures sprung. Optimistic city planners hoped to create in this rebuilt city a utopia free of brothels, squalor, depravity, and gambling dens. This was never going to happen. This is Chicago, after all. Geez, what were they thinking? Because along with the flourishing new storefronts, dens of iniquity sprouted all over the city. Chicago would never become a crime-free utopia, and that is discussed in my next book, Citadels of Sin, which is about the three principal vice districts in Chicago of the 19th and early 20th century, the levees, as we call them. That book will be coming out next year. The Chicago fire gave rise to a new generation of skilled and imaginative young architects, including Daniel Burnham, John Wellborn Roop, William Holabird, and William LeBaron Jenney, designer of the nation's first skyscraper here in Chicago, the Home Insurance Building. Collectively, they became known as the first Chicago School of Architecture. The World's Fair of 1893 was less of a World's Fair celebrating the discovery of America, as it was intended to be, but really was Chicago's great coming out party to showcase the city's renewal, revival, and vitality. Finally, the O'Leary properties as it looked. In 1874, during the period of rebuilding, a 3-story marble-fronted residential dwelling developed by Mr. Kolar, who paid the O'Learys the $500, replaced the original O'Leary cottage. And see the arrow pointing down? That's where it was. In 1937, the city attached a brass marker to the front of the dwelling. The city had purchased the apartment house in 1928 with the hope of converting it to a fire memorial. But the neighborhood had deteriorated so badly and it went into decline and was reduced to slum housing by 1954, when this entire block was torn down in an urban renewal effort. You see by 1954, the bottom photo, the O'Leary, the building that came after the O'Leary barn is still standing, the last building on the block. In its place, the city of Chicago built the new Chicago Fire Academy that occupies the site today. If you go there, you will find a sparsely populated area and experience a sense of urban desolation and isolation, which I think is understandable, given the setting and the massive destruction of property and livelihood that occurred there once long ago. I have discovered that in places of infamy, mostly crime scenes that I've explored in Chicago, so often you'll go to a block where all the houses are in place, and then you come across an empty lot. And you can see the traces of an old foundation in the weeds, and that was where the crime scene occurred. People don't want to live in houses where murders occurred. These properties often become condemned by their very nature. And I would submit that this area, which is now an industrial area just north of Roosevelt Road, is in one sense, a contaminated place. So with that, I believe I will turn it over to George. And George, come up and please enlighten us and augment us about your contributions as a novelist crafting a marvelous story about the fire.
Well, one of the contributing factors to that is really not discussed is the night.
Let's use a microphone.
Oh.
Can you use the handheld?
Yeah. Is it working? Yeah. Okay. The one of the other factors that contributed to the fire was the night before. There was what I call the first Great Chicago Fire, and this is important to note. The woodworking firm of Lull and Holmes caught fire by an arsonist, and that spread and wiped out 4 blocks. So the Chicago Fire Department damaged equipment with it, and they fought the fire for 12 hours. And then 8 hours later, they had to fight another fire, and they're exhausted, and they're worn out, and the equipment's damaged. You can't blame Mrs. O'Leary, because who milks their cow at 8 o'clock at night? That was the one way that I started looking at it. Then somebody pointed out that there are photos before the fire, there are photos after the fire, but not during the fire. The fire went on for over 24 hours. You had major newspapers there who had the equipment to do it. Why wouldn't they take photos of who started the fire? I, through my intense research, found out the person who started the fire was John Wilkes Booth. Conspiracies are a writer's best friend. And there's this great conspiracy that he did not die, he wasn't shot, he escaped, he traveled around the world, came back to Chicago. So I got him starting the fire. He's drinking, well, the night before, he started the fire at Lull and Holmes. And his mother's maiden name was Holmes. So he went to destroy his uncle's business. Then he comes back the next day, he escapes that fire, and he's drinking with Pegleg Sullivan and Dennis Regan, and he starts the fire, and he fans the fire, and he's fighting these guys off. Then he goes to the church, and he starts the fire there. So he's going throughout, all around, starting the fire. Matthias Schaefer, he goes to City Hall. He gets a horse, he goes to City Hall. He forces Matthias Schaefer to direct the fire department to the wrong location. When I started writing this, I was going to be like a Dan Brown novel. I was going to be modern day detectives finding out who did it. Well, when I started reading the books by Cromie, by Bales, it was like perfect pulp fiction right there. Everything just laid out for me. I just needed to put in the players. And John Wilkes Booth is such an obnoxious ass. He was great to write. I mean, he was everything you wanted in a villain. He would start schmoozing these women and then just break it off with them. He would just curse and swear and steal. he just fit the role of a villain perfect. And you've got him going through, he tells Schaefer to put the fire department to the wrong direction. Then, I think it was Bob Brown, who then refused to set the alarm or delayed the alarm. He has him delay the alarm. He's the one who tells Bruno Golf not to set the alarm. All the characters just fit into place perfectly. And they're throwing things out a window and he's throwing things at people. He's, seducing women along the way. He's setting fires. And one of the characters is a reporter. He is taking pictures. They did have cameras at that time where you could take a picture, you could set up, take the photo, and he's got a couple photos of John Wilkes Booth, and that's why all the photos were confiscated, and there's no photos. Again, my theory, it was fun to write. You just had everything laid out for every pulp fiction stereotype, and you just run with it. The person I feel sorry for is the mayor. Imagine you're the mayor of Chicago. You literally have less than 1 month left in office, and this happens. He's struggling, and you got John Wilkes Booth going in and giving him a hard time. He's interacting with everybody. He winds up at Isaac Arnold's house. Isaac Arnold collected all this Civil War information, letters, documents, and it all got destroyed in the fire. You've got John Wilkes Booth setting it on fire. You've John Wilkes Booth going to the original Chicago Historical Society, and he's setting the Emancipation Proclamation, setting that on fire. He's just so evil. And you got the two good guys chasing him. I got Philip Avers, who's been chasing him for years. He knows he survived the fire, the shooting, and he's been tracking him. And it starts when Mary Todd Lincoln and Tad Lincoln are in Chicago, and Tad suddenly dies. Well, I again blame John Wilkes Booth, saying he poisoned him. So that's why I know it was so much fun, because it's like, who can we get that everybody hates? And he just fit the bill. And I get people come up to me and says, can you prove that he did it? I go, can you prove he didn't? Well, he died. Oh, nope. There's this beautiful conspiracy that they killed somebody else by mistake. They put him on the ship. They didn't take him to a hospital. They wouldn't let his family identify the body. The best villain in the world is John Wilkes Booth, and he just fit the bill. And he was alive at that time, or he could have been alive at the time. You've also got 5 other cities that were on fire. One, I kind of lean toward the meteorite thing, because that kind of makes sense. You've got, Chicago, Peshtigo, 3 towns in Michigan, Holland, Michigan, Manatee. But also a few hours later, if there's a meteorite, it lands in Urbana. Urbana had a fire a few hours later. And that one I got to use, I had to write it as a Western. So I used Wyatt Earp, who was in the area in 1871. A lot of things were happening in 1871. You've got, I tie all these fires together as a plan by Ku Klux Klan as retaliation for the burning of Savannah and the March to the Sea. Each one, in 1871, you had the next month, in November, Ulysses S. Grant sends army to disband the first iteration of the Ku Klux Klan. So again, that plays in beautifully with everything I wrote. It's just it was a magnificent. the story by, the book by Bales is fantastic. The book by Cromie has got these great little anecdotes in there, and I've read other books that just, you can just go with it. And you could put any villain you want in there, and it'll work. So.
It's called imagination.
Well,
But you are quite correct. There is a theory that that Booth did survive the shooting in the barn in Virginia, and that he lived until the early 20th century. And I think there's a story circulating that there's a cadaver that was put on in a traveling circus purporting to be that of John Wilkes Booth, which is probably a fiction. But these carnival promoters drew in lots of people to view the real John Wilkes Booth. And unfortunately, the Booth family never allowed for an exhumation of the corpse. Mm-hmm. So we do not know if the real Booth is in the grave or if he somehow escaped.
And the photography back then wasn't that well developed. So you see a picture of John Wilkes Booth, he looks like 100 other guys. You know, he's got the mustache, he's got the brown hair, he's got the looks. So it was just so much fun to resurrect him and kill him again. He gets hung at the end, by the way. So, yeah.
Tell a little bit about some of your other work.
I primarily write pulp fiction. That's who wants my stuff right now. I've written the Western featuring Wyatt Earp battling the fire in Urbana. There's this gentleman who's got these group of characters called the Codename Intrepid. They fight, they're pre-World War II, this armed services group that fights Supernatural, the Domino Ladies, Secret Service X.
Are these illustrated books?
They are illustrated. The companies, the publishers I work with like new pulp. And so going with the old pulp stories, you know, in magazines, they all had photos or images, drawings and stuff.
Who was your artist?
Several of them. My artist for this book was Gary Cato. He's out in Hawaii. He gave me the photos as congratulations for my first novel. If you know who Steve Ditko is, that's kind of his style, a comic book style. But Rob Davis, he's the art director. He's drawn some of the stuff. The first photo you saw, the iconic photo of the Great Chicago Fire, he picked out randomly. He's from Missouri, so he knew very little about it. And when I said, that's the best picture you could have gotten for the back cover, he just said for him it was the most visually effective image of the Great Chicago Fire. And that was written by our Chamberlain. It was somebody from Harper's Bazaar, I believe. And he just sat there and drew this. Or it could have been a picture and they destroyed the picture and he drew the picture. So.
And George has some copies of his Chicago Fire book available. They're in your car?
Yeah, I'll keep
okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments for George or I about the fire, about the novel, about anything, or a memory of yeah, Sue, of course.
Okay, a Norwood Park connection is that the bell in the county courthouse, that
Yeah.
bell that crashed to the ground, was made by Henry Lindberg, who was a bell maker and had a house where the stop and save is now, where the liquor house was. So he was a bell maker for that.
And the story is that he overcharged for it.
And his family bell-making company in Germany is still in business.
When the courthouse burned, the bell crashed right through the center and everybody heard it.
One of the other interesting things to point out is that the village of Elmhurst grew spectacularly after the fire because real estate agents in that farm area of Elmhurst went into Chicago and was saying, come to Elmhurst and get low interest rates and build your house here in Elmhurst. And it's an idyllic community far away from the disease and destruction of Chicago. So Elmhurst became a booming western suburb of people taking the train westward out of Chicago.
And Westmont developed because there was a brickmaker there. He made these bricks. It was the highest point from Chicago. So they would load up the train there, it would go down, and then come back empty. And this way he could create as many bricks as possible and didn't have to move it all around.
And also too, Park Ridge, which was called Brickton before Park Ridge, was
Okay.
also an area for developing bricks for supply to the city as well.
Because it was the highest point.
Yep.
Sue, did we have Civil War families and fire families moving out here at that time?
Yes, yes, there are any number of those families that live here, Civil War veterans who live in Norfolk. But we have some of them identified in our recently published book.
The Chicago fire represents one of the stars on the Chicago flag. And Ed Burke, I was his speechwriter for 4 years, he had an obsession with the O'Learys. He knew some of the last surviving O'Leary descendants, and he had promised one of the O'Leary women who was in her 90s that he would get a decree from the city council clearing and absolving the family of all responsibility, and they had a formal ceremony in the city council chambers. Oh, I would guess that was about 15 years ago, and so they received their official exoneration. Sue, were you there? Remember that?
I think it was longer ago than that.
Yeah, I mean, it was in the 90s, yeah. But
It was a big event.
there's nothing really left to see that stands from the fire except the water tower. But if you go to where the academy is now and stand on the ground where the cottage would have been, it's an area of desolation. And, I mean, it's just empty, nothing built there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did Holy Family survive? Holy Family?
St. Ignatius, yes, yes, that right. St. Ignatius, Father Arnold Damon supposedly was praying at the altar, begging God to save the church. While the fires were raging, he was kneeling on the altar, praying for the salvation of the church. Miraculously, the fire never touched St. Ignatius.
One of my favorite, I want to add this one story. My favorite story is Daniel Quirk had a bar. What he did, he was giving free drinks to anybody who had a fire extinguisher. So when the fire would come on the wall, they put it out, and they were drinking all night long, and they saved the bar.
Mayor Carter Harrison, who was not yet mayor of Chicago, stood atop his family home at Congress Street and Dearborn, and had a bucket brigade pouring water onto the roof of his house. He and his family, and I don't think they saved the house, but every Chicagoan who was there fought this blaze. And I think it's really beyond our comprehension to imagine just how big this fire was. And in height, how far up the flames went. I mean, imagine you're standing in Lake Michigan at Oak Street, and the water is up to your nose, and fire embers are falling on you. And the air, you could hardly breathe the air because the heat was so intense. None of us can even imagine something like that happening.
Well, it never happened before.
No. No, we had a big fire in 1857, but that was right near the Market Hall, right near what is now Wacker Drive. But this was the mother of all fires.
Yeah, and there were so many factors that it's not surprising what actually happened.
Yes, sir.
The picture of the O'Leary house, I take it, was photographed after fire, which explains all the vacant area around.
And that demonized the family, that their house survived and everybody else's was destroyed. They would have hanged Patrick O'Leary if they caught him. You know, lynch mobs were still around in those days.
But didn't the story come out like 2 weeks after the fire? It wasn't immediate.
No, well, it was about a week after that the O'Leary name began to surface, because reporters were picking up on rumors and they went out to investigate. Yes, Stan?
I think it's interesting when to consider how these people trying to escape the flames ran into Lake Michigan, up to their noses in the depth of the water, and this is October. And I'm sure the water was not that warm at the time. Plus,
It was. It was a very warm summer, and it extended. There was very little waterfall. So, not only Chicago, but the whole area surrounding Lake Michigan was warm and dry for months.
And when the news of Peshtigo and the towns in Michigan, people thought it was Armageddon, because the Telegraph transmitted the news that Chicago and Peshtigo were on fire, and everybody thought that it was the apocalypse that had arrived. Can you imagine in those days what that must have been like? Is there any other comments or questions or any memories of family members, any descendants of fire survivors? No? Okay.
The fire really changed the building codes, though, especially in Chicago, but really throughout the whole country.
Yes. Yeah. My publishers are in California, Missouri, and Hawaii, and they all commented on that. They all realized that what happened changed it.
At least in the 1980s and 90s, I worked in the office furniture industry, and the panel systems that they use in offices had Chicago wiring. Nowhere else in the United States. It had to be encased in metal inside the panel system. Yeah, exactly. Kind of had to be encased.
Yeah, I understand that I can like a reset button, and it allowed to rebuild the two building codes, to rebuild the skyscrapers. Architects like Sullivan, Frank, White, Floyd, and somewhere. So.
Yeah, it was a brand new beginning.
Those Chicago architects set the standard for architecture in America. Jenny built the first steel frame skyscraper, the Home Insurance Building, in 1884, and that resulted in the skyscrapering of American cities. So Chicago truly is an architectural hub of great historic importance. And in 1933, I believe, when they tore down the Home Insurance Building, there were skeptics who said the building did not have steel frame architecture. They said it was a myth, it was a story that somebody invented. And so when they stripped away the masonry, they found the steel columns holding it up.
And the story was that the courthouse was supposed to be fireproof. And fortunately, there were enough people who grabbed documents and hid them in the tunnels to save them. But like you said, the bell just collapsed the whole building.
Is that bell still around? Or is it?
no, and I was just reading that supposedly pieces of the bell were used to make commemorate something or another, so I don't know that there's that part of the bell.
Yeah, they sold off pieces. Well, it helped to rebuild the city, though.
One of the biggest problems with the fire at City Hall and County Building is the destruction of real estate transfer records. So that was, it had to be reconstructed, and, people need to know what they own and prove it. That was a big problem.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the court battles that followed? Oh, good Lord.
They did.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming, and He's got books in the trunk of his car. I don't know why he hid them there, but, you know,
In case I had to make a getaway.
I don't think he stole them from the publisher, so. All right, everyone. Thank you for coming.